Bit of a heads up, this video does get a little bit ranty and is a little bit long, but it should be worth your listen still, and I hope you still enjoy. How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going ahead and testing out the brand new spells in the game that were added from the City at Celestine quest, and we're going to see if they're any good. Basically, I'm just going to take a look at it myself, give my opinion to you guys, and see whether these spells are worth using overall. Jagex said there was a magic buff coming to the game. They've added 4 spells to the game. However, there is something we need to note before we actually get into this, and this might not be the only magic buff coming. So this isn't at the moment a full-on magic buff in my opinion. We'll get to that a little bit later on, but at the moment I feel like there could be something else coming on from God Wars 3. They did say that God Wars 3 will buff magic, and of course this isn't quite God Wars 3 just yet, so there could be something bigger coming from the actual bosses, whether it's spec weapons that are going to help magic out, ability codexes or something like that. We'll just have to wait and see. However, if this is the only magic buff, then there is a few problems that we do have for magic, unfortunately, but we'll get into those. We'll talk about that. If you enjoy the video, leave a like on it. Do subscribe if you're new to the channel. And one last thing before we get started, and that is that this is going to be mostly my opinion when I talk about overall whether I think magic is going to be worth using or not. I'm going to have tested it out myself in a couple of situations. I'll talk about that, and then obviously it's going to be how I thought it went at the time and whether I think I'll be using magic in specific situations in the near future and whether it's worth it. When I talk about costs and stuff, obviously that's completely different, but when it comes to just whether overall I think it's worth it, keep it in mind. It is an opinion, I'm not stating facts. You'll have to decide that for yourself. Okay, so we have 4 new ancient magic spells into the game after the City at Celestine quest. One of them is going to be able to be used as kind of like a vulnerability, which is called Smoke Cloud. I'm sure most of you know what these spells do at this point, but one of them is called Smoke Cloud. You will apply it to your target, just like vulnerability, and instead of taking 10% extra damage, you will deal an extra 15% damage when you use a crit. Not only that, it does increase the damage cap as well by 12% for critical hits. This is absolutely huge, and this is one of the biggest problems that I have with this, because it does work on all combat styles as well. So this actually makes it so range is better and melee is better as well, because you can just bring this, use Ingenuity of the Humans, and you can apply this to absolutely any boss whatsoever, using any style whatsoever as well. While this is an insane spell to have, it isn't specifically just a magic buff. This is absolutely a full around the table buff. However, moving on to the other abilities, you have one called Exsanguinate. I can't pronounce these, but you know which one I mean. Exsanguinate is the new blood spell. This is a damage increasing ability for magic, and basically it will transform your rack ability into a rack and ruin ability. It does a lot more damage, a hell of a lot more damage. I believe it's about 300%. Wild magic doesn't even reach that amount of damage, so that puts it into perspective a little bit for how much this does. Not only that, every time you get a stack on this, which can go up to 12 by using the abilities, any abilities, you're going to get a 1% increase in damage on your basic abilities. So this means that if you get to 12% and don't cast Rack and Ruin, you actually sit with a 12% flat increased damage to your basic abilities. However, as far as I can tell, it is worth using Rack and Ruin if you are using this, because it does a hell of a lot of damage. The next spell is called Insightfair. Now, Insightfair is an AoE damaging ability, but not only that, it also reduces the cost of Tsunami. Each stack reduces the cost of Tsunami by 12%. You can cast Tsunami with barely any adrenaline. It is absolutely great, and obviously you get the effects of Tsunami as well, with the crits giving you more adrenaline. It is basically a massive adrenaline fest. You always have so much adrenaline, and of course you do get the Frost Surge as well, which deals 10 to 50% ability damage to the primary target, but it also does it in a 5x5 area, so you can hit 8 people, and I did test this out in ED1, which we'll see later on as well. The Frost Surge, which is the AoE, also has a 12-second cooldown, so it can't be spammed over and over and over again. It is a 12-second cooldown that this can go on. But 12 seconds isn't that much, so it's actually pretty decent. The final ability we won't be taking a look at in this video, as I don't have any tank armor, but it's called Animate Dead. What this does is it gives you 10% of your tank equipment's armor value as damage reduction. So you basically take barely any damage when you use this, because 10% of your tank armor's armor is flat damage reduction. You're just not going to be taking a lot of damage. Apparently this can be used to make a lot of bosses AFK, but like I said, we won't be looking at this in this video. Maybe I'll make another one at some point if I can get my hands on some decent tank armor, but for now it just wouldn't really be worth looking at. But this won't be something that most of you guys will be using all the time. The main ones are going to be the first 3 that I mentioned, so we'll focus on those, and that's pretty much it. One last thing to mention, and this is fairly important in my opinion, these spells are ridiculously expensive to use. They are so expensive to use, it's almost like throwing coins at bosses to get some damage. But in saying that, if you're 4-ticking, do not 4-tick the same ability. Just make sure you have an auto cast on your main hand on the ability you want to use. And then, of course, make sure you use a standard like Blood Blitz or some Ice Blitz or something like that you would normally use to 4-tick with, which is a lot cheaper because auto attacks do not gain you stacks anyway, so you're basically just throwing away money at this point, as that's cost a hell of a lot more to use than Blood Blitz, for example. But that's just something that I noticed, so I figured I'd let you guys know. Alright, so now we've talked about the spells, let's actually see what happened when I tried them out, and I'll talk about that while you can see it in the background, and I'll explain what I thought while I was doing the bosses, and whether I think that magic has been buffed enough to be worth it. Okay, so the first place that I took this to try it out was a Raksha. I wanted to try it out on a solo boss, one that I know regular kill times on for my range, and I know that I'm pretty consistent there, and I wanted to compare this with the new upgrades, the new buffs to magic, to my previous range kills. Now, I will be using the Smoke Cloud ability here to increase my critical damage, but I am going to compare this kill to my previous range kills without this spell in the game, because obviously now with the range skill having this on there, it's going to be doing a hell of a lot more damage, and there's really going to be no comparison whatsoever. So I wanted to compare my current kill speed with magic and all the buffs to my last range kills and see whether I could get even close. I will keep in mind that I do not usually use magic at Raksha, of course, so we're going to take that into account in our final thoughts. Anyway, while I was doing a solo kill at Raksha with magic, the damage was actually a lot better than it used to be by an absolute mile. Honestly, the damage increase from the Exsanguinate ability using your Rack and Ruin is really great, and of course having Smoke Cloud on there meant any crits that I got was increased by a frick ton, and it just all added up, and it was definitely a lot faster than it used to be when I used to try and solo Raksha in magic as well. However, keep in mind that this was still nowhere near as fast as it was when I used range. It is just not really that close at all. I think it was about 1.5 minutes slower, which, to be fair, I am not as experienced with magic here as I am with ranged, of course, so I would say probably I could bring that down by another 30 seconds-ish, and we could say that's probably 1 minute slower, which isn't absolutely that bad. Like, if you want to use magic here and you're not that bothered about kill speeds, 1 minute really isn't that bad. It's not something that's going to completely ruin your trip here. However, casting the Exsanguinate spell is incredibly expensive, and it will increase your cost per hour by easily about 4 million GP per hour, 5 million maybe, including the current prices of runes that have seen as they have gone up, and it's absolutely crazy to think that. You're going to basically be using the cost of a grimoire here if you are using magic using this spell. Now, you are using a lot more damage. It does make magic fairly similar, I suppose, to the old range DPS, but you need to keep in mind as well, we do not have an SGB. We do not have an ECB. If there was an ECB included in this, magic would be washed under the table. There would be absolutely nothing that the magic could compare to. The speeds that you could get with range here is just unbelievable compared to magic, considering my magic gear is pretty much best in slot and my range gear is not, so you can compare that sort of thing together. Of course, I do not have a 3 billion spec weapon with my magic gear, so it is cheaper to have that, but the costs of actually using the magic gear as well all add up, and in all honesty, I would not recommend using magic here. One, trying to prayer flick as well as 4-tick is just absolutely stressful on the mind, so that's one main reason I would just say don't even bother. Two, the damage just doesn't compare when you consider the extra stuff you can get with range, and obviously this was using Smoke Cloud and range was not. I wanted to take into account the fact that I did this in a solo and I may not just be used to it, so I did a duo run with someone called Wesm in game. He tanked, I just did DPS, and I did 1 kill with magic, and then I reset my aura to a range aura, reckless, and then I went in and I did 1 kill with range as well. Our kill times were about 1 minute difference there as well, so I can conclude that this isn't just because the fact that I was soloing, it definitely is just a lot less DPS than range still. The next place I went to test out another ability was going to ED1. I wanted to use Insightfair and see what this is about. I know it's got AoE on it, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this out at an elite dungeon, and why wouldn't I try ED1? I mean, I'm doing a road to 100 ED1 kills. I have quite a bit of experience there now, and I'd like to say my kills can go, you know, pretty smoothly there, so I figured I'd have most experience there and it'd be the best place to try this out. We reworked our inventory, we made a new preset, and off we went. This ability here is actually really good. I was happy with how this ability performed here. The Insightfair spell, clearing mobs, was actually really good. Being able to just spam Tsunami every time it was off cooldown pretty much and get all my adrenaline back straight away. Not to mention Greater Chain on these mobs. Being able to use wild magic on basically 3 mobs. This is without a roaming force switch as well, which I absolutely need to get. Clearing the mobs with Detonate and Dragon Breath and all that sort of stuff actually seemed faster with magic than it did with my range gear and chins. Keep in mind that I did one run with magic, and it seemed faster to clear mobs than the 80 odd kills I've done with range in this series. So the fact that I was actually clearing the mobs faster and getting to the bosses quicker is absolutely crazy. The AoE damage was nice, it did add up a little bit. It wasn't absolutely ridiculous, but it did add up quite a bit. But the big thing in my opinion was being able to use Tsunami on big mobs, and also the greater chain ability was just absolutely brilliant. Loved it, can't complain about it at all. Anyway, moving on to the bosses. The bosses, I changed over back to the Exsanguinate spell because it didn't make sense to use the AoE spell when I could change back to Rack and Ruin, which I would say is better for just focusing on bosses. The bosses times weren't too bad, they weren't absolutely terrible, but they weren't basically comparable to range. I didn't get anywhere near personal records. This is keeping in mind that I also have the smoke cloud ability as well, whereas with range and all my personal records previously, I do not. I am absolutely certain now if I came back here with range, use smoke clouds, it would probably be an absolute breeze and I'd probably get personal records almost every single time. But that being said, I did get through the bosses fairly easily, there was no issues, I didn't die or anything like that, and it was faster than it would have been in the past with magic, of course, with the buffs, so you can see that this is a decent buff still. But once I got to the end of the dungeon, it did actually only take me around about 25 minutes. Now, for you guys that are pro at ED1, you may be thinking 25 minutes? That's not that great. But actually, that's probably the time I get with range anyway, so I'm quite happy with that. I can normally do 2.5 runs per hour on range, and I am fairly confident in saying that I could probably do the same on magic. So this is very comparable just because of the mob clear. One thing I want to be kind of clear on though is I am not that great at positioning in elite dungeons. I think I know where to stand most of the time in the dungeons when I'm using chins to stack up as much as I can. Of course, you guys have all given me tips on stream as well, but the greater chain ability for those mobs that will not stack and take a little bit longer to clear, you can link them together, you can use wild magic or a gothic staff or something like that, and the damage will still hit. Whether they're stacked or not, you can still get good clear. Using Tsunami is absolutely easier as well, and for me, I'd say that's where the extra time came from. I'd be very interested if someone in the comments who is like really good with the positioning in ED1 using chins could maybe let me know if they've tried this out using Insightfair and also using the chins, and let me know what you think. Do you think it's faster as well? And if so, what do you think it is that's increasing the time? So overall, I'm happy with how it performed at ED1. My only issue again was the cost of the runes. It was super expensive to do this run, and I probably wouldn't recommend using magic at ED1 as well, because if you use range, you use your smoke cloud debuff, you're going to be doing a lot more damage, and you'll definitely be breaking those times by an absolute ton. Not only that, you don't have to spend the absolute fortune that is runes at the moment, because those prices have gone up, and you use a cast every single ability you do. No matter what, Asphyxiate will use 4 casts, Concurrent Blast will use 3. It does a lot. Honestly, it's super expensive to use these runes, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, so we've talked about that. I've tried it out at ED1, I've tried it out at Raksha, I did it in a duo, I did it in a solo. I definitely feel like I've done enough to sort of get a feel for what I think about this. Overall, I would say magic has been buffed. It has been buffed, but not in a great way. The spell that you get, the most important one in my opinion, is absolutely the smoke cloud one. But this is usable for every combat style. Ingenuity of the humans and then cast smoke cloud is not an issue. You can get increased damage on every single combat style, and range with ruby backcriminal bolts will be taking advantage of this absolutely insanely. Think about the fact that SGB, if it gets a ruby bolt proc, all of the hits are crits, all of them are exact same. So this means that if you have a grimoire on and you have this smoke ability on, you can actually hit nearly 100,000 damage if you also have the Eldritch crossbow split soul on. It will carry you pretty much the rest of the way, and it is a frig ton of damage to think about. Of course, you have to get lucky with the bolt proc, but it's going to happen eventually, and even without the bolt proc, you're going to be doing so much more damage with ruby bolts because it's a free damage cap on bosses with high health. Melee as well, with its massive damage cap hitting abilities, using Berserk all the time, you're going to be smacking that damage cap, and having it increased with the smoke cloud spell, trust me, this is a round the table buff, and it's actually better on range and melee, as they both can crit more often than magic as well. However, this isn't my biggest issue with magic. This isn't the main reason that I would say don't bother with magic at this moment in time, because it's just not worth using. And the reason that I think that you shouldn't bother is the rune costs. At the moment, with the rune prices in the game, it is so damn expensive to cast, and honestly, the prices are going to go up. They're not going to go down, because people are going to want to try these spells out. The runes are going to be in so much more demand than they were before. Soul runes are about 3k each at the moment. That's insane. 3k each for a soul rune is just unbelievable. Insightfair uses 1 soul rune, 2 blood rune, and 10 water runes. Now, keeping in mind that a soul rune alone is 3k, blood runes are about 600, 700 GP each, so you're actually looking at around about 4.5k per cast for this ability, and this is on every single ability use. Auto attacks do not use the buff, so you won't be 4-ticking with this anyway, but just all your abilities will cast this every single time you do damage except for bleeds. For example, Asphyxiate, 4 hits, 4 casts. So this is a lot of damage, and Asphyxiate will cost you around about nearly 20k, nearly 20k just to cast Asphyxiate. You're basically throwing coins at the bosses at this point, and it's really not worth it. A lot of you guys will not use Grimoire at certain bosses because it's just not worth using. It's so like it's absolutely free, so that's absolutely great, but otherwise you have to weigh up the costs. Is it worth using at Raksha? Unless you're getting stupidly fast kill times because of the Grimoire, then probably not. This is when Grimoire was around about 5 to 6 mil per hour to use. However, right now, to use these magic spells, it's going to set you back about the same cost. It's going to set you back about the same cost as having your Grimoire active. It is ridiculously expensive to cast these abilities, guys. It's unbelievable how expensive it is, but that's what it is. So it is what it is. Using abilities is like throwing coins at bosses, so it's definitely probably not recommended from my opinion to use this at all. Until something happens with it, whether they change it, whether they make magic ridiculously so strong that it's absolutely worth using that much money, I just don't get it. Of course, using things like bolts, like Hydrix bolts, Backcriminal bolts, all that sort of stuff on range is still expensive, but I don't think it compares to this. I don't think it's the same sort of thing, and you are so far ahead with range DPS now than you are compared to using magic, because magic doesn't even come close to range pre Smoke Cloud buff. Now that range has access to that as well, I actually haven't tried it out yet, but let me tell you, it's going to be a massive difference. The gap between magic and range and melee is just going to be so freaking big now. But like I said, hopefully God Wars 3 brings some extra mage buffs. Hopefully we get some nice spec weapons for magic as well, because it definitely needs it. We've got what, the Gothic staff, that's about it. You can use the ingenuity of the humans to use a SGB, but of course it hits less than it would do normally. But magic is definitely in need of more spec weapons. We could use something similar to the ZGS or the ECB, because it is a lot of difference in damage, so it'll be interesting to see what they come up with and whether we do get anything for it. If not, JGX clearly hate magic, so unfortunately for myself and for people who love using magic, it's still not worth using at the moment. Hopefully it comes back at some point. Hopefully we can do so. You can definitely still use it if you want to use it. It's still got a buff. It's still absolutely better than it was, but with the costs and the fact that you're still behind range and melee, like I said, I just suggest that you wouldn't do so. But anyway, that's going to be it from me. This has been a little bit of a ranty video. I hope you've still enjoyed it all the same. If you did, leave a like on it. Do subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you have any questions about the new spells that I could possibly answer, leave a comment down below. I will try my best to answer it for you. If not, someone else may be able to do so anyway. But again, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye.